Joining us from the Big Ten Media Day in Chicago, Illinois, is somebody who was sitting there for that and is part of a big week for college athletics. From The Athletic, senior writer Nicole Auerbach, back here on the Rich Eisen Show on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line. How you doing, Nicole?
I am doing great, but I do have some bad news.
What do you got?
The Media Day is not in Chicago.
Where is it?
We're in Lucas Oil Stadium.
Oh, by the way,
I'm talking to you from the bowels of the stadium right now.
I should have known that, Nicole. I should have known that because I did also see the shrimp cocktail on your Twitter feed.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I should have figured that out. My bad. They're not in Chicago. They're in Indianapolis. So that's why I have you on, to correct my mistakes and errors. So what is Kevin Warren saying? What is he thinking with the NIL, saying that the federal legislation is necessary? Really? I don't get that.
Well, so, he has said this. Greg Sankey of the SEC has said this. A lot of leaders in college sports have said it. And it's asking someone to come solve your problems, but also you don't know exactly what they would even do. And I think, obviously at this point, everyone's waiting for the midterms to see, which party is in charge, because with the different proposals that we've seen in the past about NIL, the Republican side, they were more narrow and kind of more specific to just NIL. And there were some proposals from Democratic senators and representatives that were more wide-ranging, that maybe healthcare, maybe, the ability to collectively bargain for athletes. Like there were other topics that got put into a bill that would also address NIL and those economic opportunities. But honestly, this hasn't really been a thing that has felt like it has had a sense of urgency since last summer, when NIL was about to come down in a bunch of different states and everyone was really frantic. And you had Mark Emmert, the NCAA president, and you had these commissioners saying, we need a federal solution. We need something that is national so the rules are the same for everyone. And what ended up happening after the Supreme Court ruling last year was, that deferring to schools, deferring to state laws, deferring, and kind of the preview of what a deregulated NCAA space is going to look like because of legal issues. And you know what? The world still spins and the world still turns, and things have existed and happened, and you have different rules in different places. And so the urgency kind of went away, I think, once, the world kept going. So I don't really know, if there is going to be federal legislation, if there is going to be, federal help here, or even if it's going to be what some of these leaders even want. But I think what they're really asking for is the ability to have rules and regulations around this stuff and not get sued. And we know that, they're trying to get antitrust protections. And Mark Emmert has asked about that, has talked about that. But really, again, in a world after last summer's Supreme Court ruling, the NCAA has to be really careful. And that's why I just think this is all going to be deregulated, to your earlier point about, the Big Ten could set their own rules and see what happens from that. That is more likely to happen because that is a better strategy in this legal environment. You can't collude with all of these other conferences and all of these other schools to set restrictions on this for athletes. We're just not going to go in that direction, and we're only moving in an area where athletes are going to be able to earn and to have opportunities. You're not going to be moving towards a way where people are going to restrict that.
Absolutely. And, Michigan's got a top-notch law school. I know that for a fact. I mean, I'm sure there are other Big Ten legal minds that can all get together and come up with something that Kevin Warren can present to athletic directors and school presidents. And the Big Ten just leads on that front. But maybe they'd be concerned that if the NIL rules that they play by are not where other people are played by, then suddenly they lose in the recruiting and suddenly they can't compete when there's a college football playoff scenario that's actually codified, that's new. Maybe that's it, Nicole. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think a lot of this just kind of feels like we're in this period of transition and flux, that this stuff is going to change. I mean, I even think about it when I think about all the hand-wringing about NIL and boosters and collectives. It doesn't feel like this is the end destination of any of this stuff. I mean, it certainly, people are more and more talking about, what happens if you get to an employee-employer model, you have collective bargaining or a union or something like that, and there's revenue sharing, right? It feels like you're moving more towards that direction where there could be a lot cleaner of a system where you don't have third parties. You don't have to, like, part of the reason everyone's freaking out or asking for guardrails is because, if you're dealing with boosters and third parties, like, you can't control them. It would be actually quite a bit simpler if a school could just pay the athlete directly or set up the deal directly, right? But that wasn't something anyone wanted to do or felt comfortable with. But, like, it's possible that we are going to move in direction that almost simplifies some of this stuff. Or, again, you get into a revenue sharing model at some point, and it's negotiated on behalf of the athletes or whatever that is. So it's hard for me to make sweeping comments because it just doesn't feel like this is where we're going to live 5 years from now. It feels like we're going to be in a different environment and a different financial reality. And I think that, again, when you think about, like, why are some of these conferences moving, or why, do we talk about the Big Ten and the SEC in a different stratosphere than everybody else? Well, it's like, if some of those outside factors come in, if the courts or Congress or people are asking, the collegiate model to change and to pay athletes directly in certain ways, you're going to need to have money for that. And so I think, it's obviously, stability and financial security, being able to offer sports. But I do think, everyone's kind of got their eye down the road, wondering and waiting to see, what's going to be the next major domino to fall that could, again, change, like, the economic reality of how college sports work.
Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic here on the Rich Eisen Show. You're there in Indianapolis, in the state of Indiana. So is Notre Dame. This just in. I've got Marcus Freeman on tomorrow's program. How much is Notre Dame being talked about there? I know USC and UCLA is something that Kevin Warren talked about today, and why not? The Big Ten's the only conference that touches both oceans. What about Notre Dame? Where does it fit in?
Yeah, I mean, it's the big question. It's really, I don't think I've gone a single day since the Big Ten added USC and UCLA where I've not been asked about Notre Dame. And, I think the Big Ten has probably never been more appealing to Notre Dame because, as you mentioned, they go coast to coast. They're national. They're in LA. They're in New York. And they're in all these places that Notre Dame likes to play and believes that it is a national brand and should be moving around to. Plus, it has USC now. Plus, it has other rivals like a Michigan and other schools that Notre Dame likes to play. But the thing is, Notre Dame will not feel like it has to join a conference unless one of two things happen. One, it can't schedule the way that it wants to. So that's the traditional games, but that's also just having teams willing to play you in different parts of the year to fill out your schedule, to fill out that national schedule. And the other thing is playoff access. So, if the playoff gets expanded and there's a lot of at-large spots and opportunities for Notre Dame, and they're going to have easy access when they have good teams to make the playoff, that's not an issue. And if you don't, like, if the SEC and the Big Ten stay at 16 for a bit, people are still going to schedule you. I think the fear is more like if it's a mega conference, if we're talking like 24 teams or whatever that is, and you're going to be playing basically only conference games or almost only conference games, like Notre Dame wouldn't have anyone to play. Like that would be something that would put a squeeze on Notre Dame. But they have less money at the table to have that independence and what they value related to that. So the question then just becomes, about the two major factors, the schedule and playoff access. And if they think that they can still exist and have their independence and do what they want, schedule who they want, make the playoff when they're good, they don't feel that impetus to do it. But again, I mean, they carry so many cards. Every conference would take a call from them. Any conference would add them. But it's really going to come down to when Notre Dame feels like they need to. And I think right now, with the Big Ten at 16, the SEC at 16, they still believe they can schedule how they want. And the model that they were looking at for playoff expansion last year and anticipated models that are going to come this year that they're going to look at, we know where Greg Sankey stands on this, the commissioner of the SEC. He wants a lot of at-large spots. That's very aligned with what Notre Dame wants. So if those factors are there is not a pressing need for them to move, at least right now. But again, if they're worried about the mega conferences, if they're worried about playoff access, that changes things.
Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic, senior writer and Big Ten network analyst, joining us from the Big Ten meetings and media week in Indianapolis, Indiana. Last one for you. What's the talk there about scheduling? Because who gets UCLA and USC in their house when the weather's awful? I'm serious. Like, how do you decide who plays USC and UCLA every year? I mean, does USC get added to the Michigan schedule? I know I got a lot of crap for saying that every, major national Big Ten rivalry involves Michigan. USC is another one. How do you decide who gets to go west, who comes east, and who plays UCLA and USC every year?
Yeah, I think those are going to be the questions that, everyone's going to have to figure out here in the next 2 years. Because I think with football, you don't necessarily have to be as tied to geography, right? Like, these are already schools that are crossing the country to play non-conference games. There's 3 Big Ten schools that are playing week 0. 2 of them are playing each other in Ireland this year, right? Like, so I think you can be creative and be flexible there and create some new rivalries or have some of those iconic brands clash, and not necessarily have to do like an East and a West because it's football. I think some of the other sports, there's going to need to be some creativity, especially for USC and UCLA athletes who are going to have to keep coming east. But I think you could have a lot of fun with it. I mean, again, I obviously would love to see Michigan get to play USC. I'd love to see Ohio State play USC. I mean, you don't want to load up and only give the good teams to USC either. We want to have a balanced schedule. But I think you're going to be able to play around with that. And I think, too, you're absolutely right about, like, the geography and the advantages there. I mean, I was thinking back a couple years ago when USC, the Pac-12 didn't do them any favors, and they played 12 straight weeks. And they didn't have a bye until, the end of the season, or they had it like week 1 or something like that. And it was just bizarre. But you're going to have, some strategic scheduling on behalf of the Big Ten. You want to put your best teams in positions to have success. So, how does that incorporate with new members that are going to be full members? They're going to get the full revenue share right away as well, by the way, for USC and UCLA. That was something Kevin Warren said today, which is a big deal. But, how do you balance that and then also give Fox and your TV partners and everyone the matchups that they want to see? And part of the reason you're adding these iconic brands is so that they do clash with your iconic brands. So I think, they have 2 years to figure all of that out and to figure out how they're going to schedule in general, because, obviously now no one has to have divisions. So I think, hopefully there's some balance. Hopefully there's, a couple protected rivalries, and you could just assign some for some of the new members. But I don't think you have to be tied to geography in the football sense, because these programs are already traveling across the country all the time.
No, I know. Somebody sitting in Ann Arbor, Columbus, Happy Valley might have to, at some point, State College, a midnight kickoff, right? Out here in the Rose Bowl or the Coliseum. Somebody's sitting there staying up till 3 a.m. watching their team play. I mean, the Big Ten's going to have a ton of windows that they haven't normally had, and that's coming down the pike. So in the meantime, I look forward to the North Face deal with the USC, the first ever such a thing, Patagonia UCLA deal that might be coming that never existed,
There was a really good, it was that meme of Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling in their Barbie outfits, and it was like, oh, here's USC and UCLA coming to Columbus in November, and I was like, oh, this is great. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be, that stuff's going to be fun and interesting. I mean, we always joke, like, wouldn't it be fun if, like, Alabama came and played Ohio State or something, for a home game in the playoff or something, right? But, like, I think adding the elements is going to be, there's going to be a nice wrinkle. And Kevin Warren did emphasize the fact that they'll be in 4 time zones. He did talk about those late night kickoffs on the West Coast. So, yeah, all that stuff that you just talked about absolutely factors.
It is amazing. The world is changing. Nicole, thanks for the time. We'll chat during the season. Look for my call.
All right.
Thanks
appreciate
again.
it.
You got it. That's Nicole Auerbach. I follow her on Twitter. You should as well. Great information as always from the Athletic senior writer.